There's sort of a myth of entrepreneurship that it is about being a great software engineer, sits in a dark room and codes by himself or herself. That's not how companies get built at all.
How can aspiring entrepreneurs come up with an idea as good as Zillow?
Building great companies and running great companies is about...
Speaking to all aspiring entrepreneurs right now, the most important thing that they ought to do to ensure that they are successful.
Well, I teach a course at Harvard. One of the things that many academic studies prove is...
Welcome back to 30 Years in 30 Minutes. I'm your host, Michael Oved, and we've got a great episode for you today. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce to you today's guest. Spencer Rascoff is an entrepreneur and company leader who co-founded and served as CEO of Zillow, a now public real estate marketplace company with a market cap of around $15 billion. He also co-founded Hotwire, a travel company which sold to Expedia for $685 million, and .la, a successful tech newsletter, as well as Picasso, Recon Food, Q, Path, and the successful venture capital firm 75 and Sunny. Spencer is on the board of directors of Palantir and is a former board member of Zillow Group, TripAdvisor, Zulify, and several other tech companies. He's a visiting professor at Harvard University, and he's the host of Office Hours, a wonderful podcast featuring candid conversations between prominent executives on leadership, diversity and inclusion, and startups. Spencer, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So your father was a successful business and tour manager working with bands like Rolling Stones and U2. What impact did that exposure to business as a young kid have on you later in your career?
My dad was a great entrepreneur, so he was at the forefront of a lot of innovations in the music industry, from watching the industry or helping the industry focus more on touring, and the growth of concert tours in the 80s was a huge industry change, to helping create the modern touring structure of 360 tours, wherein a producer or a production company or some other corporation sort of buys the rights to a tour and then takes financial risk on the tour rather than the band covering the financial risk themselves, to many other innovations that he helped create through his 40-year career in music. And as a kid, I watched all that. I was part of it and became a student of his and a student of entrepreneurship. And it taught me a lot about how to make sure that you, in whatever industry you are, you're constantly reinventing yourself. You're constantly disrupting yourself. You're trying to stay a step ahead of change. And it also taught me a lot about the benefits that can accrue to those that take risk. So he got his start in his career by leaving the accounting industry and moving into the music industry. And that was a risky decision for him. And when I was trying to decide whether to leave investment banking and private equity to do startups, I was inspired by the move that he made from accounting into the entrepreneurial section of the music industry. So it was very impactful for me, Michael.
After you graduated from Harvard College, you worked at Goldman Sachs in mergers and acquisitions. After that, you did private equity at TPG. There's no doubt that these are prestigious companies. So what important lessons did you learn at those institutions that you brought with you later in your entrepreneurial career?
Investment banking is a really good way to start one's career. You learn a lot at an early age. You find yourself in rooms that no person in their early 20s has sort of deserves to be in. I found myself in boardrooms and being a fly on the wall, listening to CEOs think about, discuss, analyze, evaluate, making company-changing decisions like whether they should sell themselves or whether they should merge with another company or whether they should sell a division. And so I learned a lot about how to conduct myself in those environments and about how companies and executives make decisions. You also, in investment banking, learn a lot about finance and capital markets and analytical skills and work ethic. So those are all very valuable skills, especially early in your career. That having been said, I didn't find investment banking to be close enough to the business operations, which is what I was looking for. So it sort of functions at 10,000 feet or 20,000 feet. It's not in the trenches, sleeves rolled up, building team, creating products, interacting with customers. Those are the front lines of business, and that's where I wanted to be. So that's why I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial, and ultimately why I decided to leave investment banking to do startups.
And so being in a room with all those CEOs, what was your main takeaway? What did you learn? What did you derive from that you applied later on in your entrepreneurial journey?
There's sort of a myth of entrepreneurship that it is about being a great software engineer that sits in a dark room and codes by himself or herself. And that's not how companies get built at all. And I learned that at an early age. Building great companies and running great companies, even if they're already built, is about leadership and creating teams of teams and elaborating on and communicating a simple mission that people can get behind and helping people understand how their work contributes to that mission and, and why they should care. So those are the things that I learned at a pretty early age, and lessons that I took into the way I led as an executive and the way that I coach other executives of companies that I'm involved in today.
Having learned those lessons, do you recommend that people who want to be entrepreneurs work in finance or work in a job similar to that before starting their own companies?
There's no one path. I mean, there are an infinite number of paths from here to there. If listeners know they want to someday be the CEO of a successful tech company or they want to found a tech company, there's so many different paths to get there. I think if I had to choose one best path, recognizing that there's no such thing as a best path and that it's very individualistic, I like the following path. I'd say I like the path of in college, taking a couple of software engineering classes or in high school, basically making sure that by the time you graduate college, you know how to code at least a little bit. You don't have to be the world's greatest computer programmer, but I do think it's a really important skill that you need to at least have a basic understanding of. But in addition to that, taking a wide variety of diverse classes that help you learn how to think and help you learn how to learn, help you learn how to communicate. And so again, there's no one major, no one concentration that has a monopoly on future business leaders or tech leaders. Coming out of college, I like the path of working for a couple of years in big tech. So 2 or 3 years at a big tech company, an Amazon, a Google, a Meta, some other large company, 500 employees or more, and trying to be as close to where the product meets the business. So for example, a good title there is being in product management or product marketing. So understanding where business goals intersect with the product that company is building for its users. So doing that for say 2 or 3 years in big tech and then dropping down a level to small tech to work at a company that's 50, maybe 20 to 100 employees. And by dropping down to a smaller company, you get bumped up a couple levels. All of a sudden, you're a bigger fish in a small pond. You can find yourself in your mid-20s as a senior director or maybe even a VP at those companies. And at that size company, maybe you get lucky and that company starts to take off and you stay there for a while and you're sort of right place, right time at a high growth company. Or maybe after 2 years, now you're say 4 or 5 years out of college. At that point, I think is a good time to start a company. So why? Well, number one, you've seen how big companies operate, how products get built, how user input and business input affects product decisions. You've met more people in tech who could become collaborators with you. You've probably met some people that have gone on to become VCs, venture capitalists who could potentially fund your new business. At that point, now you're in your kind of mid to late 20s. You could choose to go to business school if you want. If you want, Michael, I'm happy to talk about, the decision of whether or not to go to business school. Or you could start a company at that point. I like that path a little bit more, frankly, than starting something straight out of college. It can work. There are an infinite number of paths, but I think that starting something straight out of college or during college is a lot harder.
That makes sense. And you followed a similar path like we discussed in terms of working somewhere before pursuing entrepreneurship. After you left TPG, you started your first company called Hotwire. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How'd you found it? Why'd you found it?
So I was at TPG, which is a private equity firm and venture capital firm. And we were incubating the idea for Hotwire at TPG. So I was basically staffed on this idea as a 23-year-old first-year associate, along with another gentleman who was a couple years ahead of me. And he and I wrote the business plan. We got the 6 airlines to invest in the company and to decide to participate. We raised $75 million from TPG. to start the company. And at that point, we asked TPG if we could leave and run the company rather than hiring a full-time management team and staying at TPG. And it was 1999, and we decided to make that leap. It was pretty risky at the time because TPG is a great private equity firm, and I had a good thing going. And if I had just sort of kept my head down at TPG, I probably would have had a very successful career in private equity. But I did want to take that risk, and I wanted to be closer to the product, and I wanted to be in an entrepreneurial environment at a startup. That was 1999. Things were going well for the first couple of years until 2001 when 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, the company just hit a wall. I mean, it was an online travel company selling travel products at a time that nobody wanted to travel. People were afraid to travel. And we had to right-size the company and work incredibly hard to save the company, which ultimately we did. 2 years later, we were on a better path and still ended up selling the company to Expedia. So it was a great first startup from age 23 to 27. Lots of ups and downs. Probably looking back today, it feels like, all sunshine and rainbows. It was definitely not. It was touch and go. And there were many times when we thought the company would fail, but we were able to succeed ultimately.
And it really was a big success. Just 4 years after founding it, you sold it for around $684 million. Then the biggest cash-only buyout in history. What do you think allowed it to be so successful?
Hotwire is a two-sided marketplace business, like a lot of e-commerce businesses. So, Airbnb has travelers and hosts. Uber has drivers and riders. Zillow has home shoppers and real estate agents. So these two-sided marketplaces are kind of occupy a lot of, have created a lot of market cap in the tech industry. One of the reasons Hotwire was successful was that it solved a problem for both sides of the marketplace. So travelers and suppliers. For travelers, they were able to get a great discount, great deals. And the reason they were able to get great deals was because we satisfied and solved the real problem on the other side of the marketplace, which is travel suppliers, airlines, hotels, and rental car companies have excess inventory, excess perishable inventory. And Hotwire allowed them a way to sell it in a way that didn't dilute the brand. So the way the Hotwire product worked then and the way it still works today is you can get great discounts in exchange for not knowing the name of the hotel, not knowing the name of the airline, not knowing the name of the rental car, not knowing the flight time until after you hit purchase. And the reason for that is brand loyal business travelers who need to know the name of the hotel. They need to know the flight time. They need to know if they're going to get points for mileage points. They don't use that product. So Hotwire works a bit like an outlet mall where fashion companies, retailers, apparel companies use outlet malls to offload excess inventory, last year's styles or other semi-damaged product in a way that doesn't dilute the brand and doesn't attract their core customer. So because Hotwire was able to solve a problem on both sides of its two-sided marketplace, I think that's the main reason why it was so successful.
Were there any specific lessons that you and your team learned from all the ups and downs of founding and later selling Hotwire?
Well, yeah, we demonstrated enormous grit through those challenges. We stayed very mission-oriented as a company, especially in those hard times. We built a really good technology and a strong brand. We recruited an amazing team and kept them focused on the mission. We stayed pretty close to our knitting also. Like when you're in online travel, it's very easy to go for the big prize. And Hotwire never did that. Hotwire was very focused, even still to this day, is very focused on discount travel with these trade-offs. And, we knew what we were, we knew what we weren't. And that focus caused us to be successful. And then after 9/11, we also pivoted the company very successfully into the hotel vertical. So at the time, people were very reluctant to fly for safety reasons. And so we recast the whole product and brand positioning to be focused on hotels because people were willing to do staycations. They were willing to drive an hour or two and stay in a hotel. And focusing on the hotel vertical is something that was very important to basically save the company.
Speaking to all aspiring entrepreneurs right now, what can they learn from your founding of Hotwire, the most important thing that they ought to do to ensure that they are successful?
Make sure that you're solving a real business issue for the industry participants whose participation you need in order for your business to be successful. So Hotwire solved a real problem for the airlines and hotels. And therefore, we got great inventory, and then our travelers benefited. Zillow solves a real problem for real estate agents that are trying to source leads. And therefore, we earned a lot of revenue from real estate agents trying to gain connections and leads with consumers. So, make sure that that the prize that you're going after is big enough, that the total addressable market is big enough, and make sure that you're solving a real problem for both sides of your marketplace.
Speaking of Zillow, how did you come up with the idea for Zillow?
We sold Hotwire to Expedia, and I was at Expedia for about a year. And I left Expedia because I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial. I wanted to get a startup again. And my co-founders and I were shopping for homes. This was in 2005. And we were surprised that here it was, 2005, the internet was over 10 years old. And while there were real estate websites at the time, they were all pretty terrible. None of them were consumer focused. They were all industry focused. The category leader at the time was basically controlled by the industry itself. And so there were very obvious features that would be consumer friendly, but were not readily available on the web, like being able to see how many days a listing had been on the market for, or whether a listing had had price cuts, or whether a real estate agent was any good at their job. I mean, these are all sort of obvious things that consumers want to know, which you couldn't find in 2005 because the industry didn't want you to find those things. The other obvious thing that consumers want to know is, what is my house worth? And that was also something that was not readily available. So the opportunity presented itself to us to build a consumer first, a consumer focused, a consumer friendly, something that keeps the consumer in the driver's seat and puts them front and central, real estate portal that would generate, hopefully, enough consumers that we could then create some sort of ad product or lead gen product, or we didn't really know what, and monetize by connecting those consumers with professionals. But we decided, what if we just prioritize the consumer, which really nobody had done up until that point in the real estate space.
When you make it sound easier than it is to come up with an idea. So for a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs, it's very difficult to come up with an idea. What advice would you give them? How can aspiring entrepreneurs come up with an idea as good as Zillow?
Well, firstly, you should lower the bar on the ingenuity required to create a satisfactory idea. Actually, I teach a course at Harvard called ES94, Entrepreneurship and Innovation. And just this week, the class was on this topic. And one of the things that we discussed, and one of the things that many academic studies prove, is the quality of these ideas is really just sort of okay at the time that you come up with them. Most ideas are basically derivative of other ideas, and that's all right. It's a lot like music. It's like, there are plenty of great songs right now on the charts. Most of them are derivative of something that came before it. And we all stand on the shoulders of entrepreneurs or songwriters or musicians that came before us, and that's okay. So aim lower, I guess, is the first thing I would say. Don't beat yourself up about the quality of the idea. The second advice I have on idea generation is look for high TAM, low NPS. So that means high total addressable market, so a really big industry, and low NPS, meaning low net promoter score. So what are areas or industries or things that are really, really big, lots of money, but everybody's really unhappy? So real estate in 2005, and maybe you could argue even real estate today, is a pretty good candidate for that. Huge TAM, $1.4 trillion of residential real estate transactions a year, $100 billion of commissions a year, $20 billion of real estate agent advertising a year. So huge TAM, but very low NPS. It's a pain in the neck selling your home. Everybody hates buying a home. Everyone hates figuring out how to get a mortgage. Real estate agents hate dealing with all these clients they have and keeping track of them all. Real estate agents hate finding new clients. Like, everyone is sort of unhappy in the industry. So big TAM, low NPS. A third observation I have around idea generation is many of the best ideas are things that people already hack together in a sort of a do-it-yourself type way that then get productized at scale through your idea. So Airbnb is a great example of this, where Airbnb did not invent the idea of renting out your house or renting out your couch. In fact, they weren't even not even close. Were they the first website where you could rent houses? I mean, Verbo and HomeAway were before Airbnb, just for example. But plenty of people did kind of do it yourself, renting out their spare room. But Airbnb came along and solved trust and safety, payments, scheduling, demand aggregation, lots of different attributes that then productized it. My new startup, Picasso, which takes luxury vacation homes and fractionalizes them. We sell them in portions so people can co-own second homes. We didn't invent that. I mean, families have always bought a ski house together, or two families get together and buy a beach house together, or parents and grandparents and cousins, buy a lake house together. And that's happened for centuries. But Picasso has come along and solved some real problems with it. Scheduling, demand aggregation, mortgage origination, governance of the house, property management of the house, resale. Good luck if you and your three friends buy a house together. How do you get out of that if your needs change? I mean, Picasso has solved the resale aspect of it. So we've come along and taken a DIY product and productized it at scale. And so I think there are a lot of good ideas there as well.
Your ideas for Picasso, for Zillow, for Hotwire, all are such innovative ideas. All require co-founders and a leadership team. And a leadership team that knows what they're doing, that's dedicated, that's driven. How did you find your co-founders? What do you look for?
Well, now it's a lot easier for me because I'm almost 50 and I've been doing this for 25 years. So I have a large network. And right now I'm founder and chair of 6 companies, and 3 of them have co-founding teams who work for me at Zillow. So I have an unfair advantage at this stage where I can tap my network. But more generally, what you need to look for in your founding team are a couple of things. First of all, complementary skill sets to yours. Actually, just as an example, in my Harvard class, we taught the case study of Rent the Runway. And one of the things that comes through in the Rent the Runway case study is that Jennifer Hyman and Jen, the two co-founders,
Harvard grads also.
One Harvard undergrad, the other Yale undergrad, and then both Harvard Business School grads. So they met at HBS. They had very complementary skill sets. And it's a big part of the case and what kind of made them a good fit early on. You also need complementary personalities. You need a high level of trust. You also need to have a shared mission and both be fired up about solving the problem. The other tactical thing I would suggest for any listeners thinking about or currently doing startups is, in spite of all that, no matter how good a fit you think you're going to be with your co-founder, I really encourage co-founders to have a co-founder vesting schedule. And what I mean by that is, let's say Michael and I are going to start a company together, and we do the coin toss and the arm wrestling match, and we eventually figure out what our split's going to be. It's going to be, Michael's going to get 80% and I'm going to get 20%. And we start the company together. Well, what happens if a year later I decide to bail? I move out of the country, or I want to do something else, or I get a job, or whatever. I leave. Well, it's not really fair that I have 20% of the company. I'm not working for it anymore. So a best practice here is for co-founders to agree on some vesting schedule, typically 4 years, where they earn into the equity split, such that if I were to leave after, say, 1 year, for example, and I was going to get 20%, I would only leave with 5%, 1/4 of, because I was only there for 1 of the 4 years, 1/4 of my equity. And the remaining equity wouldn't return to Michael, it returns to the company, who could then issue it to other future employees or other investors or other people. So anyway, that's one thing that sadly I see many companies get wrong, and it ends up causing big problems down the road.
And more so about business lessons. You spoke a lot about your entrepreneurship course at Harvard, which I would love to take. What do you believe is the most undervalued and unappreciated business lesson that people ought to know?
In interacting with a lot of Harvard undergrads, I would say people are in a big hurry, and they don't have to be. People start businesses in their 30s and 40s and 50s. And actually, the data says that the optimal time to start your company, optimal as measured by likelihood of success, is in your late 40s or early 50s. So closer to my age than your age. So the first lesson I would say is you don't have to be in such a hurry. I also encourage young people to keep lists of ideas. Just look at problems that you see in the world around you and literally keep a spreadsheet of those problems that you see. And over the next 5 years, you'll probably end up with a couple hundred things there, and maybe somewhere in there is a good idea for a startup, or a feature for some other startup. And then we've already talked about the importance of team building, but surrounding yourself with people that are better than you, people that complement you, that you compliment with an E, not an I, is really important. Again, you might consider keeping a list of people that impress you. Just, hey, I thought this classmate was really sharp, or I thought this person, in this club that I was in with them, demonstrated real grit. And maybe 5 years from now, they would make a good collaborator on some project or some company, or maybe they should be a co-founder. So I keep lists of ideas, I keep lists of people, and I think those are good pieces of advice for young folks.
With your venture capital fund, 75 and Sunny, which is a very successful VC fund, what skill sets, what character traits do you look for in founders? And what skill sets do you think are the biggest predictors of success?
I think grit and persistence is incredibly important for startup people, whether it's founders or just early employees, because startups face huge challenges. I mean, most startups fail, and even the ones that succeed go through dark days. So you need people that are willing to stick with it and are optimistic and are willing, not only to work hard, but also to be willing to overcome adversity. If they go get a normal job at a consulting firm, investment bank, or law firm, they're not going to really, they'll have to work hard, sure, but they won't encounter the type of adversity. Just to give listeners a sense of the stomach churning nature of startups. It is very normal for startups to have 2, 3, 4, 5 months of runway left, of cash left in the bank, which is a terrifying place. Imagine you're the CEO, you've got 200 employees at your company, and you have $600,000 left in the bank, and you're losing $100,000 a month. So you know that 6 months from now, you will be bankrupt, and you'll have to look those 200 people in the eye and say, sorry, you're out of a job. We're broke. What does that feel like? It feels awful. So you need somebody with a temperament that is going to, from that challenging situation, draw positive energy and say, it's like, I know sports metaphors are overused in business, but I think in this case, it really works, right? It's like, if you're a football team and you're down by 20 points going into the fourth quarter, there's some people who are like, oh, darn, we're screwed. Like, hope is all lost. And the other people are like, yeah, like, give me the ball. It's game time. Like, we can do this. Come on. So you need people like that. And people like that tend to attract other people like that. So that's another really important aspect of founding teams. I also think in terms of skill set, this is a bit of a contrarian perspective, but technical engineering talent is sort of a little bit over glorified, and sales and communications and biz dev is underappreciated. So of course, building a great technical product is important, but it is worthless. It will amount to nothing if you can't figure out how to sell it. And so being a good salesperson is really, really important, because as a founder, you're always selling. You're selling your product to customers. You're selling your product to the media because you want them to cover it. You are selling it to influencers because you want them to talk about it on social media. You're selling it to candidates because you want them to join. You're selling it to current employees because you want them to be engaged. You're selling it to investors because you want them to give you money. And so being a good seller of your company, of yourself, of your product is really important.
How can you learn to be a good salesperson?
A lot of it's just basic communication skills. So you can learn that in a formal setting by doing speech and debate, or by joining, activities where you practice public speaking or just speaking in class. A lot of it is being a student of other good communicators, which is, you could do that every day. Just turn on the news and watch any great communicator speak, or any bad communicator speak, and you can learn. Go to YouTube and watch some Winston Churchill videos. Go watch some Barack Obama videos. Go watch Ronald Reagan. Like, it doesn't matter. You can argue the politics of these people. You can not like Obama's politics or not like Reagan's politics or vice versa or whatever, but nobody can really argue with whether or not they were good communicators. They were great communicators. And so there's a lot to be learned from great political communicators, but also great business communicators. Steve Jobs was a great business communicator also, obviously. He wasn't actually, by most accounts, a great manager of people, but because he was, so demanding and so difficult, he got a lot out of people, but he also broke a lot of people. But he was definitely a great communicator.
And you certainly speak to those great communicators all the time. First, in your capacity as an entrepreneur, and second, on your own podcast, Office Hours, which is a wonderful podcast and I highly recommend everyone listen to. But on your podcast, you speak with CEOs, you speak with founders, you speak with investors, and you speak with thought leaders about how they manage, win, and lead in business. What are the top 5 ideas and lessons that you've learned through those conversations?
Satya Nadella at Microsoft did a great job of explaining the importance of having an environment that allows for failure and what an important ingredient that is for innovation. So I think that one immediately comes to mind. There were several episodes, including one with Scott Svensson from Mod Pizza, talking about the importance of mission and making sure that your company is mission oriented and that your employees connect with the mission. So I think that's a really important lesson. And there were many episodes on the importance of diversity on teams, diversity of all types, gender, background, perspective, points of view, and how diverse teams produce better outcomes. There were several episodes, including the ones with some of the military folks. Like there's a commander of an aircraft carrier, for example, that comes to mind, that talk about the importance of pushing decision-making away from the center and to the nodes. And this is a little bit also counterintuitive and I guess counterintuitive, which is to say that most people's perception of business would have the C-suite, the CEO and his or her direct reports be the ones making all the decisions. That's actually not the way good companies are run. The way good companies are run are most of the decisions get pushed out to the business units or as deep as possible. And the reason for that is that in today's day and age, in 2024, information resides at the nodes. So in olden times, the only place with all the information was headquarters, was the C-suite. That was where everything came together, and that was like the brain of the organism. But today, if the question is this feature working, and should we invest more in it or not? The person that knows that is the PM of that feature, or better yet, the data analyst who's running the SQL query or looking at Google Analytics to figure that out. That person is 20 steps away from the CEO. And the CEO is the last to know, not the first to know about the information required to make that decision. So, this is something I believe strongly in business. You want to push decision-making out to the nodes as much as possible. What surprised me about a couple of those episodes was that military folks feel this way too. You would expect military to be central command and control, but that's actually not the way most military is anymore. Most military pushes decision-making out to the units, again, because that's where the information resides.
In addition to office hours, you're working on plenty of great ideas now. Can you tell us about some of those other ideas you're working on?
Sure. So as I mentioned, I've got several companies that I'm founder and chair of. One of them that is growing incredibly quickly is called Q. That's QUEUE. And it's an iPhone app and an Android app that lets you figure out what to watch based on what your friends are watching. So this is a huge problem that people have. Streaming is so fragmented, it's impossible to know what's where or to figure out what to watch. And so Q solves that problem by letting you track what to watch, figure out what services different shows and movies are on, and remember what you're watching and discover new content. And, it's a great company. The team is mostly from Snapchat. We built an amazing product. We've raised a couple million of venture capital, and the company's doing really well. And then I've got a couple AI companies. One of them is called Hey Libby, which is a team formerly from Zillow. We've raised a couple million of venture capital. And Hey Libby is trying to create an AI assistant for small businesses. So imagine you're an interior designer that puts photos of your projects on Instagram, or you're a math tutor that puts math lessons on TikTok or YouTube. You get pings by email, through your website, through chat, through your social media, from prospects, from clients that want to hire you for one of these projects. And Hey Libby does kind of triage of all that. So it responds on your behalf using AI and trained as you to all those inquiries. And so think of it as like up funnel lead qualification for small businesses, where it's having those discussions with potential clients on your behalf so you can keep doing your job.
Based on all of your experience, all your successes, all of your failures, if you were speaking to someone right now, what would you tell them? What would you advise them to be a successful entrepreneur?
Be a student of the world, be incredibly curious, be a sponge, identify problems, write them down and think about solutions and just learn. I think entrepreneurship is a lot like music or art. In order to be a good musician, let's say we really want to go into a recording studio and record a great album. Well, it's pretty hard to do that just like right off the bat, especially as a young person. I mean, there are some prodigies that can do it, but I think most people, they need life experiences. So it would really benefit somebody if they want to go record a great album. They need to fall in love and lose a parent and watch the sunrise over the ocean and, experience life and meet collaborators over that period of time who can be in that studio with them and play the other instruments and be the producer and the sound editor and the mixer, etc. So that's entrepreneurship. So you need to experience things, experience problems, and meet collaborators who can help you solve those problems. And don't be in such a rush. Like it'll happen when it happens. Like you don't, it's not like, oh God, I have to do a startup by age 21 or I'm too old. Like there's some expiration date for entrepreneurship. That's not true at all. And I guess to conclude where we started with, which was with my dad, like at age 65, after a 30-something year career in music, he decided to try to do it all over again and roll up electronic music festivals and innovate in the electronic music industry the same way that he had in the rock and roll industry in the 70s and 80s. So, here's somebody in his mid to late 60s still being entrepreneurial, still starting new companies, doing it again, and with the benefit of an enormous amount of experience and decades of identifying collaborators who he could then partner with during that final stage.
On to the rapid fire questions, which is the last segment of the podcast. What is the first property you Zillowed?
First property I Zillowed was my childhood home where I grew up.
What is your favorite property in the world?
A winery in Napa Valley.
What are some habits or routines that allowed you to excel as CEO of Zillow?
I manage my inbox to inbox zero or as close to inbox zero as possible. I'm able to recruit, retain, and motivate great people around me that give me leverage and make me better and teach me and collaborate with me to make me a better executive. Yeah, so I'm very efficient as an individual, but I amplify my efficiency by attracting and retaining and motivating great people.
What book do you recommend?
I like a book, Die with Zero, which encourages you to optimize and maximize your life experiences rather than your financial wealth.
You also have a book out now, right?
I also wrote a book a couple of years ago called Zillow Talk, which is sort of like a Freakonomics for real estate. It is interesting things that we've observed in housing data. And so it's a fun book. It's a quick, easy read. Helps answer questions like, how important is it if the name of the street that you live on is a cool name or a bad name? Or should you list your home on a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, or over the weekend? And other sort of quirky, interesting things about real estate. So that's called Zillow Talk. That was a New York Times bestseller. It was a lot of fun to write. Awesome.
What is a quote that you live by?
Be yourself. Everyone else is taken.
And the last question, what is the key to your success?
My wife. Which is real. It's like find a partner or find somebody. It doesn't even have to be a romantic partner. Just you need somebody in your life. Could be a parent, a sibling, a friend. Could be a romantic partner that is there to support you and is there to help you during transitions and to identify for you transitions. My wife was the first person to tell me that it was time to leave investment banking to do something else because I was unhappy, and she was the first person to tell me it was time to leave Expedia and do another startup. And so, having that person by your side or in your orbit to help you with transitions is really important.
That makes sense. Well, Spencer, this has been awesome to speak with you.
You can find out a lot more of my stuff at 75andsunny.vc, and you can chat with my Libby there too. If you find on any of my socials, it says chat with me. You can talk to an AI version of Spencer. So thanks for having me, Michael. This was fun.
Thank you again for your time, Spencer. It's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you for listening to 30 Years in 30 Minutes. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments if there's anyone else you want to hear from.